Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report with me, Yasmin Khatun. On tonight's programme, we look at the killings of 2 police officers in Brooklyn, New York, and the latest events in France, where a man has been detained after injuring nearly a dozen people in Dijon. But first, Beji Caid Essebsi has won Tunisia's presidential election today, beating Moncef Marzouki with 55.68% of the vote. Sarah Sai has been following the story.
Exactly 4 years ago today, Tunisia was in the middle of a popular uprising that inspired other countries to do the same. But today, voters have elected 88-year-old Beji Essebsi, a parliament speaker under former dictator Ben Ali, as the first ever democratically elected leader in the country.
ولهذا سي الباجي ان شاء الله بقدر ربي يركح الامور واحنا نجحنا والنجاح هذا راهو نجاح تونس معناتها بصفه عامه.
Election officials reported a turnout of 48%, suggesting voter fatigue in a country with about 5.3 million registered voters, voting for the 3rd time in 2 months. Turnout had been just under 70% in the previous 2 elections. But what will a Tunisia under Beji Caid Essebsi look like? Essebsi's victory enables him to consolidate power with his new secular party, Nida Tunis, which already controls parliament after Ennahda lost the legislative elections in October. Essebsi is also planning to strengthen relations with Egypt as part of what he describes as a need for cooperation in counter-terrorism across the region. Essebsi's presidential opponent, former caretaker president Moncef Marzouki, who took charge following the 2011 revolution, warned that Essebsi would reverse the gains of the revolution and bring back the authoritarian policies of previous regimes. Tunisia's Ennahda party, who still have a great backing in the country, did not officially back either candidate, but are believed to have lent towards Marzouki. The North African nation has so far avoided the bitter post-revolt divisions that are currently troubling Libya and Egypt. And with this election, Tunisians will be hoping that their newly found freedoms will not be short-lived.
Joining me to discuss this, Mamoon Alabbasi, news editor at Middle East Eye, and calling from Doha, Dr. Noureddine Miladi, Associate Professor of Mass Communication at Qatar University. Thank you both for joining us today. Can I come to you first?
Thank you.
Mamoon, can I come to you first? Is this a result we were expecting?
I think, yes, we are. If you look at the parliamentary election results, it did clearly mention that Nida Tunis, which Essebsi heads, is the front runner. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise. However, we must be careful not to portray it as a crushing defeat or as a one party that has gained an absolute majority in the elections. Unlike the previous elections where Ennahda was by far the number one party with a distant second, in this case we have a very, very close, two close elections. The parliamentary one, where we have Ennahda as a close second, and the presidential one, when we had Marzouki also as a close second. This shows that the electorate in Tunisia is still divided. It's not a winner takes all, even if it is in terms of election results. In terms of the parliamentary seats and the Tunisian public, it's still very much 45-50, maybe 50-50. And if we look even further into who are Nida Tunis, we'll see it in the coming 5 years. You'll see that it's not a monolithic body that is just unlike Ennahda, which just has similar party outline. It's really made of people who are on opposing ends, Democrats and pro-dictatorship, leftists and rightists, whose sole aim is to unseat Ennahda. So yes, it is expected. Yes, it's a victory for democracy today, but it's not a crushing defeat that wipes out half of the Tunisian electorate.
Dr. Noureddine, can I bring you in here? What does this mean for the Ennahda party? I mean, this is another defeat. This is the Islamic movement in the country. We saw revolution a few years on from there. Has everything changed?
Well, I mean, obviously, for another party itself, I think this was expected, and probably this was partly planned in a way, if I may say it right, because the consecutive meetings between Rashid Ghannouchi and also Beji Caid Essebsi in the previous months and over the last year, I think testify to a kind of a certain agreement to probably share a kind of a power in the country. I think Ennahda realized at a certain point during the last couple of years that it will not be able to run the state due to the fact that, first of all, it does not have the right expertise to run the government and also be in charge of the state. But also, it also did realize that there are other powers there in the country which are still in control, whether we talk about the economy or we talk about the different ministries or we talk about the police and so forth. So there is an infrastructure from the previous regime's apparatus that is still powerful, still entrenched in the system of the state, and in fact affected the ability of the previous government to run the country smoothly. I think now, obviously, this is, in my opinion, a historical moment, no matter who is the winner in this case. But I think the country has made a real transition toward a smooth democratic process. And I think everybody should be congratulated, really, both contestants, but also the army, the police, and all the organizations that have been involved, including the committee that is in charge of the election process. I think this is historic for all Tunisians, and it is a pride for not only Tunisians but every other people in the Arab region. The country now is, I think, going to make a true transition towards probably a stable, prosperous economic, political, and educational system in the next 5 years. I'm hoping, though, that the government of Caid Essebsi and under his leadership there will be a kind of a coalition government that does include every other aspects of the spectrum, meaning involving all the other powers.
Mamoon back in, Dr. Noureddine. Mamoon, what will Tunisia look like under Essebsi?
There are two scenarios. Nobody will really know in 5 years' time. There are two scenarios. The optimistic one, which is democracy will continue as it is, and when we have a viable opposition, that there is a transition of power. One election you have Essebsi winning, the next election perhaps another power winning. And this is hopefully the scenario that we all hope, and to a certain extent in Tunisia expect, because they are much more pragmatic. There is a second scenario, which is hopefully it won't come to that, which is in the event of the premature death of Essebsi or the creeping the return of the old authoritarian old guards, slowly and slowly, where they said, okay, we won the elections now, and that's it. These are the final elections. People used to fear in the 90s that the Islamists would say one vote, one time. But you hear a lot of ultra-secular or secular extremists saying the same thing. That's the end of it. Once we win,
we've heard from Essebsi for closer ties to General Sisi in Egypt. What does this mean for Tunisia?
My personal opinion is that the Tunisians won't go the direction of military dictatorship, hopefully, because they've seen what it has done to Egypt. Egypt is literally living on Gulf aid. Its tourism has gone down. It's freedom for everybody, for the secularists as well as the Islamists. Its comedians can no longer poke fun at government. So this is not something that Tunisia would be happy with.
Should people be fearful?
It's a failed model. If anything, Sisi would be kicking himself right now if he only waited for some elections where he would have the Islamists unseated in a free and fair way, without all the all this crackdown. But so I think maybe Egypt should be learning from Tunisia. I don't think the Tunisians have anything positive to learn from the Egyptians. If anything, it showed them this is the model to avoid both Islamist and secularist if they want a prosperous country, if they want a country that has a proper investment, a proper tourism.
Dr. Noureddine, can I bring you back in here? Should Islamic factions like Ennahda be fearful of a crackdown with measures and speech about extremism and closer ties to Sisi?
Well, I think probably the party that has been kind of fearful of the return of the old regime guard are the party of Marzouki, the interim president. Mohamed Marzouki, in his election campaign, obviously has warned of the return of the old regime's kind of practices. I think Ennahda is obviously part of its leadership. Led by Rashid Ghannouchi, obviously, are in a way probably confident that under the leadership of Caid Essebsi, probably the country will be run smoothly, especially if there is a kind of government that will encompass all the or most of the major political players in the country. Some other probably part of the leadership of Ennahda, which is a narrow minority, they are kind of fearful, and they voiced it. We've seen it in various media organizations, especially on social media networks, where they voiced their fears about the return of the old regime's practices and corruption. And they say Caid Essebsi has got a history of corruption, has got a history of dodging everything in the country. We don't expect any probably thing except a true dictatorship under his rule. This is the fear of some of the leadership of Ennahda. But I think my personal opinion, honestly, is Tunisians obviously during the last 2 months have been kind of drained about 3 major elections in the history of the country. These will be the culmination of the transition towards democracy. I'm glad that the party of Caid Essebsi, which is we may call it the old regime, but this old regime is reinventing itself, is actually compromising itself into the democratic process, painting itself new. And I think it has accepted the rules of the game. So I'm glad that they have won in a democratic probably elections, and they haven't probably brought or come to power through a military coup or through the backs of a military tank. I think this is the crux of the matter to me, and this is what is most interesting in the democratic process that we are witnessing in Tunisia. In my opinion, Ennahda obviously during the last couple of years has learned a lot from the failure of the Egyptian model with regard to the democratic transition, and I think Ennahda knew that it's not going to be allowed to rule by itself or even be in power for the next whatever years. And I think that's why Ennahda has backed off from all the highlights or the limelights of power in the country. Well, obviously, the next few months or the next couple of years obviously will tell us about what kind of regime we're going to witness under Beji Caid Essebsi.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Noureddine and Mamoon, for joining us. For that, we'll be following developments in Tunisia, of course, but that's all we have time for in the first part of the show. After the break, we'll be looking at the rest of today's news and the aftermath of the killing of 2 police officers in New York. Do stay tuned.